What are you going to bring to our us?
Inshallah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wa salatu wassalamu ala asyrafil mursalin Sayyidina wa nabiyyana wa maulana Muhammadin sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka antas samiul alim wa tub alaina innaka antat tawwabur rahim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun al mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Shukran jazilan, Sister Warda. Welcome to everyone. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa ashabi wa barik wa sallim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. We are about to start with the fourth attribute. I want to remind us of what we've discussed thus far, and that is that we started with the first Sifaat, wujud, that deals with the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we dealt with that Allah has no beginning, qidam, and then we dealt with the third one, baqa, Allah has no end. And tonight inshallah, we will be starting with the fourth attribute, Mukhaalafatu lil Khawaa. Allah is unlike creation. So last week, I omitted. Only afterwards I realized that I didn't put up the slides. And I hope, inshallah, that people did get the message. But just for the purpose of the recording, I want to just put up the slides of Al-Baqa, the endless, so that at least it's on record. That was the first slide. And I'm not going to actually go into what we covered last week because we have a new topic for tonight. But these were the two slides that we omitted to put up last week. So tonight's session will deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlike creation. Now, we've heard about this one, we understand it to some extent, but I hope inshallah we will be able to explain it beyond the very basic understanding that Allah is not like anything in creation. And then people move on. Let us look at what this actually means so that we can extract enough of it to give us a better sense of when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what and who is Allah. Now, when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different or unlike or dissimilar to anything in creation, then we are not only referring to the divine being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other words, to Allah's essence, the actual being itself. We actually at the same time also say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlike creation, not only in his essence, but also in the attributes, those things and those qualities that describes who and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also dissimilar to anything in creation. Nobody else can be described with those attributes or Allah's names or Allah's actions. Now, in certain instances, we say Allah is the creator, Allah is all-seeing, but we can also see and we can hear. Now, we've been through this before, and I think it's important for us to emphasize the point that, yes, we might be using the same words, but when we refer to creation, something or somebody in creation using the same words that describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we must know that there is a vast, vast difference. In fact, it cannot be compared. It is unlike anything that we know of or that we describe in creation. Allah is unlike that. That point, the takeaway point here is that it's not only the divine being that is unlike creation, but also Allah in his attributes, names, and actions. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us here and says to us in the Quran, chapter 16, verse 64, do not give likeness to Allah. Now, at the very basic level, when we talk about likeness, we talk about somebody is like that, meaning resemblance, and resemblance means to the actual, if we talk about people, how that person looks like that person. There's a likeness. Now, likeness should be understood in the broader sense that when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're not only talking about the divine being, as we said, it emphasizes that we have to interpret this particular verse that Allah is also different in his attributes, his names, and his actions to anything in creation. Now, please forgive me. Now, we've spoken a lot about time. We explained that time didn't exist. I'm not going to go through all the scientific explanations again. We dealt with it previously and we dealt it in other sessions. It's this point, as we indicated, will come up all the time. If time is the period between the beginning of something and the end of something. It's that period which exists between those 2 points, beginning and end. That's time. Time is there. It starts with beginning and it starts with the end. And that is a measurement of the existence of either an event or an object or a person or anything for that matter. Now, when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if there is no end and no beginning, there's no beginning, there's no end, or no end and no beginning, then there is no such thing as past, present, and future. It becomes non-existent. Past, present, and future can only exist if and when time starts running. The elapse of time gives us past, present, and future. Now, when we say time does not apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah has no beginning and no end, therefore time does not exist. In the absence of beginning and end, no time. Therefore, the question, or the word rather, of when is totally inapplicable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because when refers to time. There's a direct link, because when you say when, you want to get an idea of the time period or that moment. Now, how would we explain, and this is a question, I'm putting it up quite early on, How would we explain when we are told that Allah will gather, the day when Allah will gather all of humanity on the plains of Arafah? The day when Allah will gather humankind on Arafah. How would we explain that? If we say time does not apply to Allah. I'm opening the floor.
May I try, inshallah?
Yes. Yeah, inshallah.
I think it is only for creation that it's applicable. To Allah, that isn't applicable because time is a creation. And so it's only for our understanding that the when and the reference to time is a reference point for us. That's otherwise it's a very mind-boggling thing to think that there's no time. So I need more clarity. But for me, that's one point of how I can make sense of it.
Okay. Now, is there anyone else who would like to add to that? If not, let me attempt to answer it like this. The moment we refer to time, in whatever form, it never applies to Allah. It can only apply to creation. Creation is always subject to time. And when we say creation, we refer to everything that is not Allah. Everything. Malaika, Jannah and Jahannam were all created. They are not Allah. Allah created those things. So the moment we talk about time in whatever form, then it has a reference, as our sister indicated now, it has a reference to creation. It's applicable to creation, but it's not applicable to Allah. Now, it can become extremely complex. I didn't want to do this when I thought about it, but I will put it up anyway. So if time doesn't apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the day of reckoning and the day of judgment must still arrive, how does Allah gather humankind? Time doesn't apply to Allah. So how would we understand that then? The way I would explain it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not subject to time. So it means that our beginning, or for that matter, not only humankind, but everything in existence is already known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before we were even created. So what Allah wanted us to do, to come and account for our deeds on the day of reckoning, it's already known to Allah, because that is a timeless dimension of existence. Now, it can become very complicated now, because now you will say, or could ask, does it mean that Allah already knows what our deeds will represent? Yes. Allah knows before we were even born who's going to Jannah and who's going to Jahannam. Allah didn't decide you're going to go to Jannah and Jahannam without the consideration that you were given choice. Allah knew you were going to do it because of Allah's all-knowing knowledge. Allah knew how you were going to exercise your choice. So when we say, yeah, I say when again, if we use the word when, you must remember at all times, when is not applicable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at any time, because Allah is not affected by time, but creation in totality is affected by time, because all of it has a beginning and an end, and time is that period between beginning and end. Does that clarify it a bit? Can I just hear if that assisted, or whether I should try and explain it more? Warda, Sister Warda?
It definitely clarifies it.
Okay.
Because when we spoke about the Qada and Qadr, we mentioned, I know it's not on today's lesson, but yes, we mentioned at that time that everything is already known by Allah, but for us, time is a factor that affects everything that is created, but it's within the knowledge of Allah.
Already.
So yes, it helps a lot in the explanation. Shukran.
Okay, inshallah. These concepts will become a bit more clear, because we're going to deal with Al-Alim, the all-knowing. We're going to deal with the will of Allah, where the questions of Qada and Qadr will also be dealt with and explained. So inshallah, when we deal with those issues, some of the questions that you might still have will hopefully be clarified. But on this point, that's as far as we want to go, because we are dealing with the Sifaat that Allah is totally unlike creation. Now, we said everything in creation depends on and exists within time. Now, I don't want to go back, but these Sifaat are also interrelated and interconnected, that it's almost impossible to explain things without going back to what we've already covered and using that as a means of strengthening our understanding. Now, if we say everything in creation depends on and exists within time, how can I make such a confident statement? Everything exists and time applies to every single thing in existence. Because if you were to say that time does not apply to, say we were to use the example of Malaika, then it would mean that time means beginning and it means end. It therefore means if there was something that existed and time did not apply to that form of existence, it would mean that that something existed next to Allah already, that Allah was not alone. Whatever it is that we are saying time doesn't apply to, it means that when Allah was alone, that thing was also there. Can we see why we can be confident that there was a time when only Allah existed and everything in creation thereafter had a beginning, and the moment it has a beginning, then time runs for that. Not our type of time that can be measured in years and minutes and seconds and so on. Time in the way that it would apply to that level of existence. We are at the lower samawat, at the created universe, the lowest level, but there are other levels of existence. How time applies there, Allah knows. But time applies because nothing can compete with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his oneness. There was a time when Allah alone existed and before Allah created anything. So that was time, and we dealt a lot with time. Now we're going to go to space. We we hear people say, space and time does not apply to Allah. Hopefully now we'll be able to explain, to some extent, we'll be able to explain the question of of time. But are we able to explain why space never applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Maybe this will assist, inshallah. Now, what is space? How do we define space in our world? Space is an area, a specific area. The size of that area has dimensions, length, breadth, height, and so on. And we describe that size or that space by using these dimensions if we know about it. But there are certain things that we cannot describe with dimensions because we don't have the tools to measure it. But that is the space that it occupies. We'll come to some of that later on. Please forgive me, I'm getting a cold. Space also has a specific form and a shape. Difficult to imagine because we're talking space now. And when we talk about space, we look up into the air. But we exist in space. Where you are sitting or standing or lying down, you exist within that space. Everything in creation exists within space. Now, if you talk about space as form and shape, one can almost refer to it, it's an object. Before we get there, space has form and shape. And it has an inside and it has an outside in our material world. But space can also be described, if we're talking about space within the space that you find yourself, then it can also be described with up, down, top, bottom, side, front, and back, which is referred to in the, with respect to the topic of Tawhid, it's referred to as direction. Space can be described with direction. Now, if we trace the history of the universe by going back in time, then we've been able to establish, well, before we go back in time, we've been established that the universe is expanding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about that in the Quran, and we've been through that a few times already. Allah confirms that the universe is expanding. Allah is expanding the universe. But scientists have acknowledged now that the universe is in fact growing bigger, 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 bigger every single second as time progresses. So the universe is getting bigger. Now, if we reverse time, we go back into the past, back and back and back and back and back. The further we go back, the smaller the universe will be at that point that we are looking at in the past. Because if we look into the future, it will be growing bigger, bigger, bigger. So the opposite must clearly be true. If you reverse time, then things will get smaller. Now, it will get so small, and this is, in fact, a scientific fact now. It will get so small that it will condense into a single entity. What scientists refer to as the singularity, what we refer to as the first spark of nur, from which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe. A single spark, from a single spark of nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe. Scientists have confirmed that and calls it the singularity. Don't want to sound too technical about this, but what this does confirm, and this is the point, if everything collapses and become condensed into a single entity, then where is the space? There's no space. Because space was created when that single entity expanded, and that created the space. Before that, there was no space. So something, an external something, had to trigger that space to come into existence. And Allah says, Allah is the one. Allah is the one who is expanding everything and in the process creating the space. Now, if Allah is creating the space, which at some point did not exist, how can you use space now and apply it to Allah? Remember, Allah was alone and there was nothing else. So now you want to use something that must still be brought into existence and use that to apply to Allah? It's illogical. It doesn't make sense. So space cannot be used to apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what we do have to say is that as far as Allah is concerned, there is no space. But every single thing in the entire creation exists within space. If there was no space, then nothing could exist. And the same argument we use with time, the same argument can be used as a proof that space also applies to everything in creation. Otherwise, we are saying that whatever that something is that you are referring to is boundless. It has no boundaries. It is endless. It exists everywhere, endlessly, without boundaries. And only Allah can be described as one who does not exist within the confines of space, because space has got dimensions, a length and a breadth. It doesn't matter how big it is, but ultimately it can be measured. Allah's existence cannot be measured, and therefore space cannot be used to apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what I've done, I've given a graphic depiction now of what I try to say in words. We talk about space. Everything in space has a boundary, an extreme. It's the edge of that object. And normally it would have its dimensions of length and breadth. I didn't know how to put in height. So not in this pic here. So length, breadth, and height would be the one thing. But you would also have shape and form. Everything in creation, whether we can measure it or whether we can determine what it is, doesn't matter. It has to have shape and it has to have form. Like, for example, our planet Earth, but then you also get other shapes. A house has got a combination of regular shapes, circles, triangles, squares, and whatever. And then you get irregular shapes. To give you an idea, clouds take up space. And now, how do you measure that space of that cloud, of the cloud? Very difficult, but that's immaterial. Whether you can measure it or not, it has a shape and it takes up space. And that the entire universe at the material level would take up shape and would have form. How shape and form applies to other levels of existence is not something that we can fathom in our own mind. For example, malaika. Malaika at times can take the form of a human being. There are examples of that, many examples. But their natural form is not visible and known, and it's not material, and we can't actually define what its shapes are. But it has shape. So if we look at shape and form, we must realize, if we take, for example, any one of these three objects that we've got here, it would have an inside and an outside. Anything that has shape or that exists within space, takes up space, has an inside and an outside. Now, if we take this house, for example, the space of the house is the house itself, but it exists within the space around it. So you refer to the house, the space inside, but there's also space outside within which the house exists. Because we say everything in creation exists within space. And it would, of course, have volume and size. The clouds, I don't know how to explain that in an understandable way, but maybe we could. If we look at the Earth, depending on where we are on the planet, and we look up into the sky, then we would say up in the sky, we see the clouds direction up. Then we say from the north or the east or the west, there's clouds in the east, but no clouds in the west. Or the house, inside, outside, top, bottom, all the directions that you will, that we are familiar with. So space, now look at why have I actually gone to this extent to actually put up this, this graphic to show you that space is something that exists everywhere and everything exists in space. It's got dimensions, but there's also other factors that's associated with space. And we'll come to a bit more detail about that as we move on. Now, we are talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlike creation. Now, how do we describe creation? Can we? Yes, even if we don't know everything about creation, there are certain things that applies to everything in creation. Everything. For a start, everything in creation has a beginning and has an end. Because there was a time when whatever it is, it did not exist. Allah existed alone. So creation, in whatever form, has a beginning, and then ultimately it will have an end. Everything in creation is composed of parts. We discussed, if you look at the human body, you can go to the bigger components and say you have got your different organs and so on, and you can break that up even more. And then you come to the human cells and all of that. Now, what about the sun? The sun we can also break up into smaller components till we get to the atoms, the different types of atoms that makes up the sun. In fact, everything in creation at the material level is made up of atoms. That's the building block of everything in our material universe. But at other levels of existence, you might find that the parts that things are composed of are different to what we know of, but we don't know what's going on there. But at our level, at the material level, things are composed of parts. Everything. There's no exception. And for us, every single form of existence, whether it is lifeless or not, or alive, the laws of nature apply to it. That's creation is not above the laws of nature, or the laws of physics, or the laws of science, whatever you want to call it. And as we've indicated previously, it has shape and form, and it can be described with dimensions, some of which we will find difficult to describe, but it can be described with dimensions. It's not endless. And creation, in whatever form, has an attribute of dependence. For a start, whatever it is that needs to, that we are looking at, if we were to say a tree or a house or a star, it needed to be brought into existence before the beginning. It was preceded by non-existence. There was a time when it did not exist, when Allah alone existed, and Allah said, kun fayakun, and then only its existence started. So it had a beginning. So it needs a trigger. It needs an external force other than itself to bring it into existence. And nothing in creation is so unique that there is nothing like it. Yes, we are unique in terms of certain aspects, fingerprints and so on. But there are many human beings. There are many plants. There are many animals. There are many stars. There's a multiplicity. Multiplicity means many. So yes, creation is not one of its kind. And of course, it's got dimensions and direction, front, back, top, bottom, inside, outside, left, right. And one of the things that is associated, in addition to all of that, is that it's known by limitation. It's imperfect. Only Allah is perfect. Whatever it is, there's a limit beyond which that, if you talk about power, ability to see, ability to do, there's limitations. It can't go beyond that. That's creation. Attributes, how we describe creation, these are the things. Now, what are we saying? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlike any of these things. Now, to take it further, I'm quickly going to run through this one. If we take direction, it's a description in space. Allah does not have a body, and therefore Allah does not have a front, a back, a top, bottom, or left, or the right side. Allah is beyond space. That which I've just mentioned now, the directions, that applies to only that which has a body or a form or a shape. Separation, I didn't cover this in the previous slide, but nothing can ever be removed or reduced, divided or disconnected from Allah. If you talk about a human being, for example, your heart can be removed and be replaced by another heart. Your arm can be amputated and you can still continue to live. Separation means that Allah is forever the way He was before anything was created, and nothing ever changed. Nothing can be taken away or removed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All these words, nothing can be removed or taken away or divided or disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is forever the way Allah was and will forever be, because Allah is utterly perfect. Because if something could be removed, like if you're a person suffering from an ulcer, in order to get perfect health, they remove your ulcer. You then get what they call at the human level, perfect health. If, for example, may Allah forgive me for using an example like this, something had to be removed from Allah to become perfect, then it means that before that was removed, Allah was not perfect. Doesn't make sense. Allah is perfect right at the beginning and remains perfect eternally. Nothing can be added or joined to Allah or united with Allah. Now, you've heard some of these things before, that you become so submissive and you dedicate yourself entirely to Allah. Can you become united with Allah? Can you merge with Allah? Can you become one with Allah? Nothing can ever be merged or united or joined to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing. Not even when we talk not only about the divine being, but even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Sifaat or names. We don't know all the names, but nothing can be added to what Allah already has, because Allah is already perfect. So nothing can ever be joined or added to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't ever think that your understanding of some of the aspects of tasawwuf, that you will become one with Allah. No one ever becomes one with Allah. When people make utterances and statements, it must be understood in the context in which it was made and what it was intended for. But from a pure Tawhid point of view, you cannot join or add or merge or unite anything with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ever. Changing. Allah remains as Allah was. And these are just words that I couldn't even get to all the words. Allah cannot be altered or convert something about Himself to something else, or substitute something about Allah with something else, or displace or replace or modified. Allah remains utterly perfect and is unchangeable. So when you hear the word change, remember what we said here now, that Allah cannot be changed and is not subject to change. Motion, movement, or stillness is also never applied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why was this added in? Because that which is still, it's motionless, has the possibility of movement, and that which has movement has the possibility of stillness. That which is in motion currently has the possibility of any possibility like that means that Allah is subject to change. It's something that some of the scholars have not necessarily accepted, but it's something that Imam Ghazali, may Allah be pleased with him, has added in as one of the things that never applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we talk about change at the level that we've described earlier, also add in motion or stillness are not things that you can apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let me complete this and then I'll open up the floor for questions. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I said last week, Allah is all-knowing and time doesn't apply to Allah. Allah knew we were going to sit here and we're going to be discussing this particular Sifaat tonight at this time. And we may have questions. What does Allah look like? And Allah gave us answers. Every single answer that is required to answer a question that will arise now, in the past, or in future, Allah has already covered the answer to that. It's for us to go and look for that answer. And yeah, Allah gave the answer to the one question. Children ask this question, what does Allah look like? Even adults ask. Now, what does Allah look like? Okay, so we can't see Allah, but what does Allah look like? No vision can comprehend him. Allah says this now to us himself. We're talking about Allah, now Allah gives us the answer. No vision can comprehend him, and he comprehends all visions, and he is absolutely subtle, all aware. So there's no question about whether we can see Allah. This is, well, let me just pause there. Even this particular verse, different scholars, from a Tawhid point of view, Allah is not visible, and vision requires one to see something. A person observes something and sees that is vision. But Allah is not visible. So are we talking about the human eye, that vision? In my view, and from what I've read, my Tawhid doesn't allow me to even speculate on the possibility of one being able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not firstly physical and material in form, and secondly, Allah is beyond space and time with no form, no body. But yet Allah says to us And this hadith that confirms it, that there will be a point in the akhirah we will be able to see Allah. Allah says that, Rasulullah confirms that. The thing to remember here is, if we talk about the akhirah, you are not talking about the limitations of the material world, of the earth, of our universe. And most of the scholars says that vision that's referred to is not referred to as the physical vision of what we have here, but it's the vision that the knowers of Allah develop when they develop basira, sight with the heart, where they've developed the ability to see with the heart and not with the physical eyes. I didn't mean to go into that now because we're running out of time. The one thing we must seek to know Allah from the day we are born till the day we die. Every single moment that we can dedicate to striving to know Allah better is our very purpose on this dunya. Our very purpose is to try and get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, there are other things. You must make ibadah. You must be Allah's Khalifa on earth. But the people of Tasawwuf, they say that how we should understand our purpose is that to get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now to know Allah and His essence is unknowable. We are advised not to go into the topic of what is Allah. I'll come to that now. And we were told that it's like a deep, dark well that has absolutely no bottom. If you fall in there, you might never return ever again. That if you try and fathom and work out, is Allah maybe not this or that? Is Allah not made up of whatever you want to come up with? You go down that hole, it's unlikely you will return. So questions like, what is Allah? Is Allah a force? Is Allah light? Is Allah this? Is Allah that? What does Allah look like? Stay away from those questions. Ask the other questions about Allah's Sifaats and Allah's names and Allah's actions. Ask those questions. Yes, as many questions as you want. But stay away from these questions. Don't delve into and try and grapple with things that is not knowable. And Rasulullah has warned us about this in this hadith. He said, contemplate on creation. Do not contemplate on the creator, meaning the essence, the dith of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, you do not have the ability to do so. Allah didn't create us to actually be able to contemplate these questions. And in fact, a logical way of responding to this, that Allah is totally unknowable, is that Allah is utterly perfect with nothing lacking. Nothing can be added to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perfection. Yet we look at creation, it's marked by all of those limitations and drawbacks. You want to take something that comes from there to ponder on what is perfection. You want to take imperfection to explain to you what is perfection. You've got it the wrong way around. It's not possible for imperfection to ponder and reflect and contemplate and come up with answers that can actually explain what perfection is. Now, deficiency, imperfection, reliance, and dependency are the typical things that's associated with creation. And when Allah says Allah is unlike creation, know that none of these things can ever, in whatever form, be applied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, it's a bit easier to understand that when we talk about the divine being or the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's unlike anything in creation. We accept that point. But yet, Allah is unlike creation. At the one level we accept, and at the next level, what do? We take those abilities that exclusively belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we claim that we have it. So you, in effect, when you say you can do this, or you own this, or you have these abilities, you're actually setting up yourself as a partner. You are like Allah. That's what you're inadvertently doing when you claim these things. So we must be very careful when we say so glibly that we know, oh, that's mine, and really believing it's mine. I own it. How can you say I worked all my life for this, and I earned, and I struggled, and I own that, that's mine? May Allah protect us. We all fall in that, where we, without realizing, we say, it doesn't belong to Allah, it belongs to me. You're setting yourself up now as an equivalent, or a partner, or an equal, as far as that particular thing is concerned. We must be extremely careful. It's not things that we must just talk about. We must implement it in our lives. To utter, yeah, Allah is unlike creation, and I can speak about it and explain it, and tomorrow you're going to do exactly the opposite by claiming what belongs to Allah for yourself. Are you also setting yourself as an Allah? Allah protect us all. So the point here is that it's not only the divine being that's unlike creation, the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single attribute and action and name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala belongs only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if there appears to be a similarity, then know that it cannot be the same. It's unlike, because yours is an acquired thing. You don't have it. None of the things, your talents, your abilities, your intellect, your possessions, you don't have it. You acquire it. You are bestowed that. You are granted that. Bi-idhnillah, if Allah so wills. And unless we recognize that, we're going to fall in the trap that I mentioned earlier. If we understand this Sifaat, it will become a lot easier to get our Tawhid in the correct place. These questions are not easy. We're going to have to come back to it. And we will come back to many of the things that we've already spoken, because we're speaking about Allah. All those things that we've spoken about are not separate. There's one Sifaat, now we move on to something else and different. All the Sifaat are only descriptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're talking about one divine being that we are describing something about one of the qualities when we deal with the Sifaat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we will in all likelihood be touching on this, but this one in particular, different from creation. Go back to the YouTube channel afterwards and go through all those points that nothing can be joined to Allah, nothing can be separated from Allah. Allah doesn't have a front, a back. Allah is not, I didn't mention this, but let me mention this last point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in something. Allah doesn't exist in space. And neither does anything in creation exist within Allah. I want to make that point. Perhaps time doesn't allow me to go into detail, but I need to emphasize this, that you're going to say, then where are we? That might be a question. If we are not in Allah, then where are we? Allah is not in us. So is there a place where Allah is not? You see, okay, 1 minute. I was much younger. In fact, I was in my early 20s, 50 years ago. Subhanallah, how time flies. I asked the sheikh who was giving us Tawhid, if Allah is everywhere, is Allah inside me? And if I am doing something, can I then not claim that Allah is doing whatever I am doing, good or bad? And if Allah is not inside me, then it means there's a place where Allah is absent. So how can Allah be everywhere, but Allah is not inside me? I won't give the answer to what he said. This is my answer that I'm giving to you now. As a young man, when I was asking this question, what I used to govern my thoughts and my questions was my understanding of the material world, of space. I use the concept of space. You put something in a space, it displaces whatever is there and it occupies that space. It's an area that's defined. Like I said, my body is, that's the human body, and I have an inside and an outside. I made the mistake by using a material thing and try to draw a comparison between a human being and our Creator, who is timeless and spaceless, and where these things that apply to me does not apply to Allah. We're going to come back to some of these things. Time doesn't allow us to take it further now, but if you want to follow up on that, we could do so next week, inshallah. I'm going to quickly open the floor for the last round of comments or questions. The floor is open.
Buddha Salie,
Yes.
I think maybe it would be good to go into the space with positioning of Allah. I only got it now, right on the end, when you said when we want to compare to a physical dimension, or a created being or created thing like space, that when we compare Allah to that, of course, Allah is not comparable to that. So maybe it would be good to just revise that again next week, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. I'll touch on it.
Shukran.
I'll touch on it again. And if you're not clear, then please don't let me move on. This is what I want us to do. If anything requires more explanation, then please feel free to do it. And if I'm not able to answer, I'll go search for the answer, or I'll speak to my murshid to guide me on this issue. But shukran for that. Is there any other comment or question? If not, then inshallah, we've come to the end of the proceedings tonight. Muhammad Tasiq, are you still with us? Yeah, he might not be with us. Okay, inshallah, we've come to the end. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Oh ya Allah, we implore you to open our hearts, our minds, and loosen our tongues so that we can benefit from these sessions. We yearn, ya Allah, we yearn with all our beings to get to know you better, ya Allah. Make it easy for us. Remove the veils of darkness and ignorance from our hearts so that we can understand and know you better. And that should ultimately result in us living better lives and becoming better people. Guide us, our families, our friends, especially our young ones. Guide them and protect them. The people who are sick, give them shifa, heal them if it is your will, ya Allah, and if it's not, then put the tranquility in their hearts to accept what your decree is. Remove all difficulties and obstacles from us, from the Muslim Ummah, and from for us in our country here in South Africa. We are going through extremely difficult times. Ya Allah, bring relief to all of us. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Let's just all recite Al-Fatiha together. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم دعوة فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحية فيها سلام وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. شكرا جزيلا. I want to thank everyone for making the effort to be here tonight. And please go back to the YouTube channel when these things are loaded and go over some of these things that we've discussed. Shukran for your time, and I look forward to meeting you next week, inshallah. I leave you in Allah's protection. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.